So from 7 to 7:30, we're going to be shifting gear completely again to a different place, because we're going to be moving on to talk about faith, communications, and primary progressive aphasia, which is my brilliant guest. We've got Professor Cindy Weinstein, who's at Caltech. Is that right? Yes. Yes, it is. And we have Dr. Anna Volkmer, who's from University College London, who, have you ever seen that scene from The Italian Job when he walks around the chairs, introduces people, and he puts his hand on the back of chairs and says, Camp Freddy, you all know. I've just watched The Italian Job too much. It's the mini thing. But I feel like that when I introduce Anna. Anna, you all know. And then we have Dr. Katherine, Carol, Britt, or Kat, Kat Britt, who is joining us all the way from another USA. So we've got two guests from the USA this time, who's coming as a postdoc research fellow at the University of Pennsylvania. Hi, thank you very much. Anna,
Hi.
would you mind would you mind just doing a round of introductions for me and just initially talk about the research while I just very quickly rush out and back again?
Of course, not a problem.
Thank you ever so much. That's really kind of you. And yourself, of course, as well. Do introduce yourself.
I might do that. Okay. So usually when I host podcasts with Adam, we start with a round of introductions and we talk about who we are, what our research interests are. And I might just start off by mentioning who I am, although I'm a frequent, as Adam said, I'm a frequent flyer in the Better Researcher, Dementia Researcher podcast and blogging scene. So my name is Anna. I'm a clinical speech and language therapist by background, but I'm also an advanced fellow, an NIHR advanced fellow, so senior researcher at UCL in London. My particular interest and work that I do is in the area of primary progressive aphasia and dementia, communication in dementia more broadly. So for the listeners, and we can come back to this in a minute, but for listeners who aren't aware, primary progressive aphasia is a rarer type of dementia where language is the primary or leading issue for people as the disease develops. And I'm particularly interested in and do work in developing interventions to help people and their family members who are having to live and have conversations and cope with this type of stuff on a day-to-day basis. So I wonder whether we should pass round the circle, so to speak. Professor Cindy Weinstein, would you perhaps be a next logical person to introduce yourself?
Sure. Anna, can you hear me? Okay. And is this the time where we should talk about our work, or is this just a quick intro?
It's up to you. I think it'd be love to hear a bit of a précis maybe, and I'm sure that Adam and I will have some questions. We always like to hear more and more about what people are doing.
Okay, sounds good. My name is Cindy Weinstein. I'm an English professor at the California Institute of Technology in Pasadena, and I'm here. Many thanks to Adam for organizing this amazing event. I'm here because I had the opportunity to write a book with Dr. Bruce Miller at UCSF, and his area of expertise is fronto-temporal dementia, although he can speak and knows about all of the dementias. Why did I want to write this book? Why did I have to write this book, which is called Finding the Right Words, A Story of Literature, Grief, and the Brain? And Anna, how I wish that we had someone like you when my father was dealing with Alzheimer's many years ago. He was diagnosed in the 80s. And in the 80s, everything was Alzheimer's. And when I went to UCSF and studied in the Global Brain Health Institute program, which I can talk a little bit more about, I went specifically to learn enough neurology to write a book to honor my father, who Bruce told me actually had early onset Alzheimer's with the logopenic variant. So really word finding was front and center in my mind, especially because of this sort of terrible synchronicity that I talk about in the book that I spent many years chewing on. And that's the fact that my father was losing language at the
Yeah.
same time as I was becoming an expert in language.
Yeah.
And that painful simultaneity was really something I needed to try and get my head around. And the book is basically a back and forth between me and Bruce. It focuses on what I eventually learned at UCSF are called clinical presentations. I had several of them just kind of burned into my brain, whether it was word finding or spatial disorientation or behavior or memory. And so I do kind of in literature, they're called close readings. So like I sort of bear down on what those clinical presentations look like, the grief I experienced in observing them, and how I use literature to understand the world. And then Bruce responds in the chapters to my descriptions by providing kind of like neurological explanation of what may have been, what probably was happening in my dad's brain.
Wow.
And it was really important for me to write this memoir with someone, which is kind of weird because Bruce never knew my dad. So like, how do you write a memoir about someone you don't know? And Bruce was like an amazing listener and empath. He was the doctor we didn't have. So like, so I wanted Bruce's expertise so that the reader wouldn't just sort of have my story about middle class Jewish girl from New Jersey, gets a PhD, becomes an English professor, like, okay, that's interesting. But I wanted someone who could explain the complicated neurology to readers so that when families go to the doctor, it's not the first time that they hear temporal lobe or primary progressive aphasia. So there was really outreach and access component to writing the book, which jived very neatly with the mission of the Global Brain Health Institute.
That's fantastic. I mean, that's so valuable. It reminds me of conversations I have almost every week with the clients I work with, because I work both clinically and in research. And they often have, it's often very difficult to join up the medical speak with what they're experiencing interactionally and in their relationship and in their emotional responses to what's happening. And what there isn't is enough information. There just really isn't. People are constantly, who I work with, are constantly searching for that kind of information in any, in lots of different formats. So thank you. I think that would be an amazing resource. And thank you for sharing a bit about that. Katherine, do you want to, or Kat, I should say, apologies. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. Thank you so much. I'm so happy to be here and to meet you all. And Cindy, kind of similar to your story, most of my experience as a nurse, I'm a nurse, I've been a nurse for several years, had been in pediatrics. And then I experienced, my father had Lewy body dementia. And
sorry,
it looks like y'all are frozen.
Oh, we can see you.
Okay. So my father had Lewy body dementia. And so from that experience, I shifted to caring for older adults aging in place and their family and caregivers, which was an amazing experience. And that experience drove me to go back to school. And I got my PhD in nursing from the University of Texas at Austin. And then I started my postdoctoral fellowship at University of Pennsylvania. And I study protective factors. So I look at spirituality and religion and practices as a coping mechanism for people facing dementia decline in their caregivers. In the Hope's future, I'm looking towards designing interventions that support individual spirituality and tailored interventions that can support the coping for people that are facing these challenges that have touched on today. So
I can
that's me.
completely see why Adam match made us into this group. All of what we've talked about, it all connects. It's about how people live with this, not, it's not about them. It's much more every day. And that, the relationship, the spirituality, the being. I can see why you did that. And welcome back.
Hi, thank you very much. I've eaten 2 sandwiches in
Nice.
that time. Thank you, Anna. Did you get a chance to introduce your work, Anna? Did you go first?
I did, absolutely. I just talked a little bit about.
I put my headphones back on when Cindy was there.
Cindy was talking. I kind of just gave a very brief overview, and in fact, what I didn't say is that, and I think perhaps this is important to mention, is that I'm particularly interested in conversation and how we can support people, not only within who are living with these language-led dementias, which we call primary progressive aphasia, and which Cindy mentioned. Her father had so there's 3 main types of language-led dementia. 2 are kind of in the fronto-temporal dementia category, and 1 is in the Alzheimer's category. Cindy mentioned that her father had the Alzheimer's type, but I really look not only at the people with PPA, but I'm actually just embarking on a bigger study with people with other types of Alzheimer's as well. So we've developed a conversational intervention where we work with the person and their partner, be that a family member or best friend or adult child, and we work with them together as a couple or a dyad, because it doesn't just happen to the one person, as you've both just illustrated, and we try and work with those 2 people to see if we can help people live better. And it actually fits really well with it. We've had a paper come out today, an open access paper, which is actually which is quite exciting, but it's kind of the prequel bit where we were looking, doing some extra work with people with PPA and their family members, and we ran lots and lots of focus groups with a fantastic student called Maria, and we really found that actually that's often one of the things people are searching for, not only people with the diagnoses, but their family members. They're searching desperately to be told how to interact often with their family members. So we know this is an intervention that people are searching for in a way.
So this is, Anna, just to pick you up on that. So this is talking about recognizing that so much communication isn't speech.
Indeed.
And is that part of it then, to be able to teaching people to be able to pick up on the other cues, but also perhaps before somebody's dementia has progressed, that you can teach this in advance?
Yeah, that we can equip them and tune people in, if you will, to be able to communicate, because it isn't just about words, as you say. It's about gesture and feeling and knowledge and awareness of that person's beliefs and preferences, and that holistic view, and training people to be able to use those strategies. So I saw a wonderful client recently, and I've known many of them who almost enact miming it, for even to that extent, where people can mime out their intention, and then actually supporting the people around them to tune into that. Because I think often people get really focused on, oh no, you must say it, or what does that actually, what is the specific word that's meant here, rather than thinking about the intention, which I think overlaps with both of what
just going louder and slower.
Yeah.
And so that, you must find yourself you must be a bit of a counselor sat in the middle of that sometimes. That must be an incredibly difficult thing to teach. To equipping people in that way, because it's very personal. You're putting yourself in the middle of that, in that situation. How do you prepare for that?
Well, first of all, I don't think one can always separate communication and interaction from relationship and emotion. So I think one has to be prepared. But I think that we're all health professionals have counselling skill. Oh, you know, most humans have some counselling skills, the skill to listen and hear and acknowledge how people are feeling. And then if there is something I need to do beyond my scope of practice, I need to know where to send, you know, where to get further support. And that's, I think, also part of it is often, I think, as Cindy flagged, that people, even nowadays, people often don't have those connections to other support services. So I think in the 80s, it was probably a bit of a void, but even now people say to me, I feel really isolated. So I think that's also part of it. It's not only having my own tools, but knowing what tools are around me. And
I might not have been very good at communicating in the first place back when talking or listening wasn't an issue. So I guess as well. So, I mean, maybe as a replacement for what they had rather than as an enhancing what they didn't do. I'm probably not making much sense.
No, you are. Yeah.
I know what you mean. So as you say, great grouping. I'm going to come back to Katherine or Kat.
Yes.
So we've talked a bit today about different non-pharmacological interventions, and we talked about sleep and technology and lighting and getting outside, and so much of what we've looked at today seems to kind of move towards the modern. It is, you know, can we put new lighting in place, or can we use different things we can use? But I mean, yours feels very, you know, doesn't rely on any of those things. This is about people's inner centeredness, their faith and mindfulness. What's your research shown so far? I mean, are there better outcomes for people that had that faith to start with and have that good place to go to?
That's a great question. So I've looked at associations with, you know, dementia progressive symptoms, right? So cognitive function, sleep disturbances, neuropsychiatric symptoms. And I found that spirituality and religious practices are associated with, and I looked at in dementia and in mild cognitive impairment, and they're associated with better cognitive function, fewer sleep disturbances, and fewer neuropsychiatric symptoms. My next step is to look at longitudinal associations over time to see how those, you know, one might impact the other. But a lot of research has been done on spirituality. More research is being done on mindfulness, meditation, but there hasn't been a lot of research on spiritual interventions in dementia. So that's what I'm hoping to really do. And I really feel that it needs to be tailored to the individual, right? So what does that person find meaning in, and really finding out what that is?
Because we're not talking about an intervention here is to go persuade somebody they should find religion later in life. It's not that at all.
No,
this is
correct.
So there must be other ways that you can get what some people get out of going to church, or that quiet reflection, or that kind of faith. There are other ways to get that aren't through imagining some greater being.
Right. And as people have certain, you know, patterns that they've had over their lifestyle, whether it's been going to a religious service every Sunday or whatever that might look like, as they get older and they may not be able to attend anymore, how can we bring those resources to them to help still bring them, you know, those identified sources to bring them coping and support and encouragement?
What they get out. Yeah, absolutely. And that's, it's funny because Kellen, who's not here today, because that counts not just in where you go and the things you did every week, particularly if you move into a nursing home, but Kellen does this great work about things like people who were used to doing their own cleaning or vacuuming or dusting and polishing. And when you remove those things away, I mean, it's not the same at all, but, you know, putting somebody in a room and saying, you don't have to clean this anymore, we do it. Or taking somebody away and saying, you don't go to church anymore. Because you can't go now. It has the same. How do you put that back into somebody's life to keep them on track?
Yeah, no, that's what I'm going to find out, I hope.
And is that, I mean, is this, how do you recruit to trials like that? I mean, is this, do you find I mean, and I'm assuming you don't specifically look at a single faith. Is this looking at different faiths as well?
But most of the research that I've seen, you know, has been in Catholic and Protestant faith tradition. So we really need to expand and look at diverse religions. And the populations that I have found that are in the research and that I found in my own research who find religion and spirituality important tend to be older adults, those facing serious illness, and historically underrepresented populations. So really trying to identify who those people are that might find religion and spirituality important and trying to bring resources to them to support them is really what I'm hoping to
particularly, I
create
guess,
and
where
test.
it was part of your everyday life. You can see how, some religions like Muslim community where that's, it's very much a part of life that would have different results from somebody who was more passively involved in the church.
And
Cindy,
caregivers too. Also, caregivers have 40. I think that the highest coping strategy they use is prayer. So it's another population.
Absolutely. And as well, there's been research in the UK looking at communities as well, and how communities come together and can provide support mechanisms and structures both, and that's one of the things, whether you're a believer in God or not, one thing that everybody always picks up on is the fact that churches provide brilliant communities of people that bring you together and do address those issues around social isolation or exclusion, and they were so important during the pandemic. Actually, I suppose that was your work affected by the pandemic, because I'm guessing in the UK churches couldn't run services anymore. I wonder if you've looked specifically at the impact of that.
Yeah, one of the studies we did was a qualitative study with dementia caregivers, asking how the social distancing had impacted their religious and spiritual practices and their coping. And for many of them, the caregivers were able to virtually connect with other groups, whether it's a community group or a service, doing yoga. But we found that they reported the older adults with dementia were really cut off from their source of usual practice that they engaged in. And some of that was due to physical disabilities. They may have hearing issues or visual impairment, so they couldn't see a service that was on the television. So really need to create, use creative innovation to connect them to those resources and figure out ways to continue to do that for people that are isolated.
And like with your work, Anna, and some of the work we looked at the Enliven project we looked at earlier on today, that there's this potential that those places that provide those services, these faith-based groups in the church and things, can be better at facilitating and enabling people to continue to engage and also as well make sure that there's no stigma there. People aren't kind of stopping to go because they don't want people to see them like this.
Right. Yeah, there's a lot of work to be done there.
Cindy, it's an awful. I'm not going to ask you the personal question about whether that's played a part in your life or in your father's, but do you talk about this in your book about mindfulness and the potential for some of these more inward reflections to deal with some of those, agitation or to deal with stress and anxiety that come up? Does that come up in the book? And through your discovery you've done with GBHI?
Yeah, it's interesting. I wrote the preface to the book at the end, and I was just about done with the year of studying neurology when I was sitting in a cafe where I like to get work done and write, and I started remembering when my dad died, but more specifically sitting Shiva, which is the Jewish tradition of mourning someone who's died. And in kind of secular Judaism, you spend like a week and you sit around and eat really unhealthy food and kibitz about wonderful memories of the person who's died. What I remembered in the cafe in Berkeley was how I could not do it. I didn't realize, even though my dad was dying right in front of me, I forgot he was dying because the disease took so long. And so when it came to mourn his death, I And certainly to tell stories about this wonderful person, I was paralyzed. I gave a eulogy, which I actually have a copy of in the book. It was on yellow paper. I had saved it. And it was actually a blueprint for the book that I was going to write decades later. And in the cafe in Berkeley, the light bulb went on, and what I realized was that in studying neurology and reading memoirs and writing this book and becoming close to Bruce, I was actually sitting Shiva finally, after like 25 years after my dad died. And I sat Shiva the way I would do it, which is to say, I read, I studied, I wrote, and it looked very different from the way Jews typically sit Shiva, but it was my version. And the light bulb moment was, oh, I asked Bruce to sit Shiva with me, and he did. So that's the preface to the book. And I am kind of a heathen, frankly. And so it was quite interesting to me to realize that, like very religious Jews who sit Shiva for like a year, that's what I had done. So that's an answer to your question.
No, it absolutely is. It's a brilliant answer. Thank you very much for sharing that. The
Thanks
book,
for
you can,
asking.
of course, we'd encourage everybody who's watching this to go buy your wonderful book. Why don't you remind
you.
everybody what it's called and where they can get it?
Okay, that's very nice of you. I actually have a copy right by me, so you can see it. I love the cover. These are neurons on the top, courtesy of Bill Seeley's lab at UCSF. And then this is a picture of me and my dad in New Jersey. And I like this because it captures like science and personhood and all that good stuff. So it's published by Johns Hopkins, so you can get it through them. And they're actually having a really good sale right now, 40 off. Of course, you could do Amazon. You can order from your independent bookstore. And then the thing is, like, the images in the book, like of the brain and stuff from UCSF labs, those are in black and white, but on the book website, it's weinsteinandmiller.com, readers can see the images in color. So there's some really, really good images, I think, of the different aphasias that you were describing, Anna, and where the assault on the brain is happening. All of this is to help readers so that when you go to the doctor, you are familiar with some of the language. It's not the first time you've heard PET scan or MRI or stuff like that. So I would encourage readers, if you don't want to buy the book, just to like go on the book website and look at the figures, because I think they're really helpful.
Fantastic. Thank you. Because I think I'm going to find that really helpful with all my clients as well.
Thanks, Anna. Thank you.
Yeah, and Anna, I should give you a chance, as soon as you've had a paper published today, and is this the one that you struggled so much to kind of, you were so passionate about making open access? Is this that?
Oh,
paper?
no, that was one I published last year where I so
Anna is amazing at fighting tooth and nail to make sure that none of her papers are hidden behind paywalls, and she will bend every ear, force every hand she can to make sure that I've been on the end of that.
I'm sorry.
No. It's important. I mean, you know, we want everybody to learn from each other when we hide behind these paywalls. Particularly, we were talking about earlier about care home managers can't even get access to papers.
Exactly.
God, I mean, if they're on a website, open access, they can get them. So tell us about this paper. Where can people read it? What's it called?
So the paper that we...
Has it got a snappy title?
It has, actually. It's like going into a chocolate shop blindfolded. And so
that's what it's called.
Yeah. It was a quote from one of the family members who was saying the problem with services, particularly speech and language therapy, because that's what we were discussing, but I think this is a universal problem, maybe for many people with dementia, is that people don't know what their care pathway should look like, what they can ask for, what they could benefit from. So they know there's all these potentially good things out there. It's kind of a metaphor. There's, you go into a chocolate shop or a sweet shop, there's lots of lovely things there that you'll enjoy, that you'll be, give you a fulfilling experience, but you don't know what, the person was kind of explaining, they were blindfolded. They didn't know what speech therapy did. And so we use that as a metaphor. And I think that's why I've been so emphatic when, Cindy, you've been talking about your experience, because it's such and that's why I've been struggling. I always struggle to make everything open access, because it's a bit of a bone of contention for me, and actually one of the reasons why I started on my journey into academia, which was because there was so little research evidence that clinicians, family members, and people living with these diagnoses, often of the rarer things like primary progressive aphasia, there was just nothing out there that people could get to. And then you don't know what you're meant to ask for. So that's actually part of my mission. One of my next projects alongside this study I'm doing is we're developing a care pathway. But I can tell you about that a whole other time. Maybe we need a whole other podcast for that, Adam.
Yeah, I'd love to hear about it.
And if anything else, you've chosen a title that will definitely get you traction on social media. I think that's a great title if there's a sneaky way of doing that. Kat, I'd feel bad not giving you a chance. Have you got anything to plug now that we're here? My next guests haven't arrived, so we're good.
Well, the article that I referenced is published in Clinical Nursing Research. It's called Religion, Spirituality, and Coping During the Pandemic: Perspectives of Dementia Caregivers.
So that's really good. I'm really excited to see. I mean, Anna's work, Anna is prolific. We kind of see lots of Anna's work all the time in various ways. So I always know whenever Anna's always got something new on the boil. It's great to see with your work as well. I'm interested to see how that plays out with that space, because it's kind of not really looked at. I think people might find that a bit of a sensitive area for different reasons. And it's important to look at, and particularly if it comes about that people can be facilitated to continue with this and get the evidence they need to support that work. Cindy, we haven't had a chance to talk about the Global the GBHI, the Global Brain Health Initiative, which we should have done, but I'm right in thinking their fellowships either just opened or just closed this time. But what I love about GBHI is that they take in so many different people. You don't have to be a neurologist or a psychiatrist. You can be a writer or a psychiatrist. You can come from psychologist, as long as your passion is there to learn and to spread global brain health awareness and to do that work. There's a place for you there to go study in Dublin or San Francisco.
Right.
And you must be a great example of that. You must, because there can't have been anybody else like you in that program. You must have been fairly unique.
Well, my gray hair certainly made me unique. I had several decades on most people in the cohort, and it was truly an incredible experience. I was in a group with neurologists and gerontologists and photographers, dancers. And as you say, Adam, everybody was committed to working on dementia and outreach and access. And one of the other things I'll just add is how global the group
definitely
is and was. There were people from Latin America, South Africa,
cool.
Just really an extraordinary experience.
I've posted a link to GBHI in the chat there. Anybody who's interested should go and have a look. By all means, Anna, if you want to drop back into the YouTube chat and post a link to your new paper or to the book, please feel free to do so. I think one of my guests keeps coming and going, worried that they're waiting for you to all go. So I'm going to let you all go and hope that the second guest turns up. So thank you very much to my brilliant guests, Dr. Anna Volkmer from University College London, Dr. Katherine Britt from University of Pennsylvania, and Professor Cindy Weinstein from Caltech in the USA and the GBHI. Thank you so much, everybody. I'll let you all go. Have a great rest of your Friday
Great to meet
evening.
you all.
Nice.
Bye-bye.
Friday afternoon.
Bye.
Thanks. Take care. Bye-bye.